Welcome everyone. Thanks a lot for staying with us. You're watching PlainSpeak with me, Shivani Gupta. The Supreme Court today quashed the present system of appointment of Chief Election Commissioner and the other election commissioners and ruled that a panel consisting of the Prime Minister, the Chief Justice of India and the Leader of the Opposition will make these appointments now. This is quite a departure from the current system where only the elected government decided with no say of the opposition or the judiciary. The order has met with mixed responses, some hailing it for bringing it more transparency and independence into the process by virtue of checks and balances, others criticizing the court for usurping the government's domain and expanding it to others when there is no such provision. The reality is the Constitution actually left it to elected governments to formulate a formula for selection and legislate on it. No government since independence has done it. So are the courts just filling the gap left by the governments, or is this a case of pure judicial overreach? Will the union government now bring in a bill on this issue? And where does this latest order, which the centre opposed, land the relationship between the two arms of democracy, a relationship already strained over the Collegium system? We'll take those questions to our guests in just a bit. First up, more about the major judgment. A 5-judge constitution bench in a unanimous verdict agreed CEC selection should be in the same manner as the CBI directors. This is what the court also added. CEC election commissioners to be appointed on the advice of a panel. This panel will comprise of the PM, the Lok Sabha leader of opposition and CJI. When there is no leader of Lok Sabha, leader of the single largest opposition party will be part of this panel. The appointment will be done by the President of India. Now, while the court did say that this will continue to hold good only till a law is passed in this regard, it is still seen as a setback for the centre because the court added EC's appointment needs to be insulated from executive interference. So the message is also very clear. The centre had expectedly opposed this petition. This is what their contention was. The judiciary cannot interfere in the selection of the CEC and the election commissioners. Inclusion of CJI in the process would amount to judicial overreach. Inclusion is violation of the separation of powers. They also added court can quash an appointment if an unqualified person is chosen. And the presumption that the inclusion of the judiciary will bring fairness to the process is wholly flawed. This decision of forming up a panel, that too with the inclusion of the CJI, is in stark contrast to the current system. So this is what Article 324(2) of the Indian Constitution says. Election Commission shall consist of a CEC and election commissioners. The CEC shall be appointed by the President. Council of Ministers will aid and advise the President. And the process is to be followed until Parliament enacts a law. So why did the judiciary step into this? There are some other examples from past too when the SC has stepped into the domain of appointments of key positions. In 2019, in the case of the CBI director appointment, for example, the Supreme Court had directed that the tenure should be a minimum of 2 years, not less than 2 years, and the transfer of the director can only happen with the consent of the appointment panel. A year later, in the Enforcement Directorate's director appointment also, the Supreme Court ordered that the director's tenure can be more than 2 years. Earlier in 2006, Supreme Court had directed that state governments can appoint a DGP only from the top 3 senior-most officers, and that DGP should have a fixed tenure of at least 2 years. Now, this decision by the court isn't happening in a vacuum. Immediately, everyone linked it to the debate currently on over judges' appointment and how the Supreme Court has been resisting a debate over how they themselves select judges for high courts and the Supreme Court. There has been this heated executive versus judiciary debate, and where do their powers end? Government, in fact, has called the Collegium system, quote, opaque. The centre has made it very clear they do want the NJAC system for appointment of judges to come back, a bill that was passed by Parliament but later struck down by the Supreme Court. Government wants greater say in the appointment of judges, which used to be the norm earlier. On the other hand, the Supreme Court has repeatedly hit back at the government, the centre, for questioning the Collegium system. So the big debate that's coming in after the Supreme Court order on the selection of the CEC and the other election commissioners, is this mere plugging of a hole by the courts or judicial overreach?
इलेक्शन कमीशन का इंडिपेंडेंट बजट होना चाहिए, इंडिपेंडेंट सेक्रेटरीट होना चाहिए, रूल मेकिंग पावर होना चाहिए।
इसलिए है क्योंकि आज संस्थाओं पे 360 डिग्री से इस सरकार का प्रहार है, परोक्ष रूप से या सीधे रूप से।
We have to welcome this judgment. In fact, if you see the director, how CBI director has been appointed, this is they are appointed by a high power committee that the executives cannot appoint this important post.
Let's go across to our guest joining us. Amitabh Sidha, Supreme Court lawyer. So is C. Arima Sundaram. Adil Singh Boparai is from the Congress party. The BJP has declined to be part of this panel. Virag Gupta is a constitutional expert and Mohammad Amin is former ECI joint director. I do thank you all for your time. I want to begin with the lawyers on the panel first. C. Arima Sundaram, the question that everybody is asking or debating today, why should this order not be seen as a judicial overreach? Ultimately, such a decision should have come from the parliament and not from the court.
Look, the answer to this is very simple. That this decision was to come about, that this is the movement of the courts over the years is very clear. It was an inevitability. And I'll tell you why. Over the years, the courts have come into trying to form a wide panel away from exclusivity of the executive to appoint so far as key appointments are concerned. So far as the judiciary was concerned, of course, that was taken on the ground that those are judicial appointments, they should be independent of the judiciary, separation of powers. Thereafter, other key appointments like the CBI director and other appointments came up, and again it was felt that there should be a broad-based panel which includes not just the executive alone, that is to say the executive as in the ruling government alone, the ruling dispensation alone, should include the opposition, should include the judiciary. What was to happen with the CEC was but an inevitability, and I'll explain to you exactly why. You see, there are certain appointments which are sheer executive appointments. Let's take appointments like the governor. Let's take appointments like the bureaucrats, the secretaries, the chief secretary, cabinet secretary. These are pure executive appointments. Those are appointments which continue and remain to be entirely within the realm of the executive. There are other appointments like, let's take the CEC, which is really a constitutional appointment which deals with the basic fulcrum of democracy itself and goes to the root of democracy. Same way, the CBI was meant to be an independent agency to do an independent inquiry, more or less in lines with what the FBI in the United States is, and to be independent as an investigative body, able to investigate also into governmental errors. So therefore, the movement of the court has been that in such bodies which don't come solely within the executive realm, like I said, governors, executives, the bureaucracy, chief secretaries, cabinet secretary, the army, etc. Right. When it comes within the realm of the larger constitutional framework, dealing with independent agencies, and especially something like the CEC, dealing with the very fulcrum of democracy, the entire basis of democracy rests in the CEC's hands, really because of the elections. It was but natural that a panel like this would be suggested by the court. I'm not surprised with it at all. I don't think it is judicial overreach, because unless the Constitution expressly covered the issue to such an extent that it was not capable of forming this kind of body, the idea is that, look, let there be such a body. Having said that, I have to point out one caveat.
Okay.
You see, there could be one criticism in that when you have the Prime Minister, which is the leader of the House, you have the leader of the opposition, and you have the Chief Justice of India. Often you're going to have a disagreement between the opposition and the government on the selection. In which case the final selection boils down to the judiciary. So the judiciary actually becomes the selection, the person who selects. And I think this is where there could be some criticism, saying that is this not becoming really a case where in reality, in factual, practical terms, that the judiciary will be appointing the CEC as well. and there could be a criticism there.
Yeah. Okay.
But so far as the overall concept of having a representative body to decide this, which consists not only of the executive, the ruling dispensation, but includes opposition, includes judiciary, I think conceptually, I think that is correct. And that is the right way to head, unless we're going to appointments which are exclusively within the executive.
But here's my question, Arima Sundaram, and I'll take that to Amitabh Sinha. Fundamentally, the issue is not who's on the panel. Fundamentally, the question is who should decide what the panel is and how the selection should happen. Now, you say, rightly so, that the courts have been moving in this direction. But the question I'm asking Amitabh Sinha is this the court's domain in the first place? If the Constitution did not assign the court this responsibility, and it was the legislature's responsibility to decide this, then why are they intervening in this, rightly or wrongly? Whether we like the outcome is a separate issue. Fundamentally, I'm discussing the separation of powers right now. Amitabh Sinha, on top of that is the inclusion of the CJI, which Arima Sundaram has included in his opening comments, giving virtually the judiciary a veto as to who becomes the CEC. And thirdly, is the additional angle that you don't want any interference of a larger group of people when it comes to your own appointment, but you are interfering in all other appointments. Amitabh Sinha.
Thank you, Shivani, for your very intelligent comment, or whatever it may be called, when you were asking question to me. See, I really appreciate the answer given by Mr. Sundaram, my brother. But the important thing here is that what your question was also, that whether it is constitutional, whether it is legal or not. See, the headline of your story also is clearly showing that whether it is judicial overreach or not. See, overreach is a very particular word, and judicial overreach is now very evident, in every, most of the cases where the sensitivity is there or the national issues are there. So my point is, see, in this situation, then the Supreme Court has violated Keshwar and Bharti case. See, the basic structure, the basic fiber of the Constitution is being violated by the Supreme Court itself. So when the Supreme Court is here to look after whether the violation of any system is there or not, Supreme Court has started giving instruction that this type of governance should be there. And the most important thing, Justice Joseph's observation, oral observation, certainly it was there, that we need, just Mr. Sessions type of CEC. It means he is directly doubting the integrity of the present CEC. So this is very unfortunate, let me tell you. And what my basic contention of this against this Constitution Constitution bench judgment is that everywhere Supreme Court is trying to, put their nose. Supreme Court is trying to decide what exactly is good or bad. But where is the people's mandate? If the government is being chosen by the people's mandate and people is supreme in this country, so judiciary has nothing to do with anything like that. And lastly, see, Mr. Joseph has said that, finally, the judiciary will decide who will become the CEC. It means his basic, hidden message is whether CEC is capable to sack the Prime Minister who is properly elected by the government or not. This is very unfortunate. So it is just like a judicial coup. Let me tell you a very, a very strong word against it. This is sort of a judicial coup. So this is nothing but unrequired thing. Why judiciary is behaving in such manner? It means the judiciary or this constitution bench has no faith in the people's mandate. This is my clear view, and generally what my point is that people in India also are thinking that whether they have voted for a proper government or not because of under the light of this constitutional judgment.
Okay, I will go to Virag Gupta in just a bit, but I do want to bring in Mohammad Amin as well. As a former member of the Election Commission, do you believe that this is a welcome decision, or this actually creates any further issues as well?
No, sir. We can welcome the honorable court order, and just we can say this was long awaited. And so many times you can see all parties are having hue and cry about this election commission, and they are having the problem with the election commission that they are favoring to the government so many times. And this time Mr. Goel was appointed as the election commissioner. So that was the objection of the Supreme Court, they want to see the file. So the Election Commission has already sent, the government has, the Law Ministry has sent already the file to the Supreme Court. But they have found there is nothing against the selection process. But they want to make their own judgment, and they have given the judgment about the selection, how to choose the Chief Election Commissioner. Actually, this is the constitutional body, and the public want to be a good person. But always see, last election commissioners was appointed. So every government, this government or before that government, they have objection. So about the selection of and they are always blaming to the commission that they are favoring to the ruling government. But this is not fair. But we can say this is the good attempt by the Supreme Court has given to the government. They can make a law in the parliament. And
I was going to come to exactly that question. Wouldn't it have been better if the Supreme Court directed the government that please formulate a policy and bring a law on that, instead of directly ordering the government that this is what the panel is going to be? Ultimately, the Constitution left it to the government. Arima Sundaram is waving his finger. Yes, Arima Sundaram, I'll come to that to you in just a bit. Yes, Mr. Amin.
Legally, I just can say this is a welcome to this is good for the Election Commission.
Okay. So fundamentally, I want to reiterate, Arima Sundaram, that I am not objecting to the fact that 3 people will decide who the election commissioner is going to be. I think fundamentally we all look forward to consensus. That's our basic nature, and the more there are checks and balances, I think people feel that there will be greater transparency. But why? The fundamental question that keeps coming back to is whether they should have decided it, but they have left a door open, that this stands only till the government brings in a law. Very quickly, Arima Sundaram, I'll go to our other guests.
You see, why I shook my head earlier was, you said, could the court not have directed the government to pass a law? The answer is no. The court cannot direct the legislature to enact a legislation. That is not possible at all.
But they suggested so in the past to the government.
The court
they have made their recommendations in the past to the government.
No, the law... Sorry, you are not getting the point. You cannot direct the legislature to pass a law. But where you feel a vacuum exists, it's been held as far back as the Vishaka case and various after. Vishaka was about harassment at the workplace for women and all that. Where the courts find that there is a lacune, the law has been well laid down that the court can lay down guidelines to be followed until there is a legislation.
Okay.
So there can always be a legislation which is brought in, but until then the guidelines can be laid down by the court when the court feels a vacuum needs to be filled in, where a situation needs to be addressed.
Okay.
And that's what the court has done here.
All right. Adil Singh, Boparai, I want to come to you. One of the other objections that people are raising is that this whole suggestion, and the government also said this, that this whole suggestion that a process can be free and fair only if a judge is sitting on that process, even though we are having this debate in the country of what about judges' appointment themselves, don't you think that for anyone in politics, forget about whose government is in power currently, that is a fundamental question to ask. If everything can be fair only when there is a judicial oversight, then how do we do so many things in our country that don't mandate a judicial oversight?
The objections to this historic judgment are preposterous, and it only reflects a lack of understanding of our revered constitution. Free and fair elections is part of the basic structure of the constitution. And a system of checks and balances ensures that the arbiter to our elections is a person who is non-partisan. I think this is the rationale behind the Supreme Court judgment. And now coming to India 2023, today you are witnessing an onslaught on institutions by a majoritarian government. You cannot have the executive ride roughshod over institutions just because they have a majority in parliament. We're a country which is a constitutional democracy governed by the rule of law. Merely because you are in the majority does not automatically mean that you're right. And the constitution is what the judiciary interprets the constitution to be. And finally, I don't understand what is the difficulty with transparency.
Then why not the Collegium? That's what people are asking. Why don't we need greater transparency in the Collegium, for example, then? This is the obvious question that everybody is asking.
Again, this is what I said earlier. People who are raising objections are reflecting and demonstrating a lack of understanding. There is consultation in the process of appointment of judges. Once the High Court Collegium makes a recommendation, the name goes to the Law Ministry. The name is vetted by the Intelligence Bureau. The government can give its inputs. The government can return the names. The problem today is people today are relying upon WhatsApp information.
No, but it's not the same as a panel.
That is unfortunately molding their opinion.
No, but Adil, to be fair, it's not the same as a panel where everybody is going to have a vote. It's not quite the same.
Let me reiterate again, since you put a question about the judiciary. I again reiterate that the Collegium system involves and entails a consultation method with the government for the process of appointment of judges.
Fair enough.
I don't want to repeat it again and again. But coming to the moot point, today you're witnessing an onslaught of institutions. Hence, it is important that you have a collegium or a body of persons electing somebody as critical as an election commissioner. In fact, the Congress party will go one step further. Today, the need of the hour is to even have the process of appointing the director of the Enforcement Directorate through a collegium.
Okay.
Because today, institutions and investigating agencies have become an extension of the government of the day. And I say this in national interest.
No, actually, I repeat myself one more time. I think the issue is not so much if there should be a consultation. First of all, consultation and a panel are two different things. But even if you were to have a panel, I don't think the objection is to that alone. The objection is who should it come from? The judiciary or the legislature, the parliament, which is the will of the people. I go across to Virag Gupta now, constitutional expert. Where do you stand on this? We haven't heard from the government just yet. We haven't heard from the BJP, that is the power at the center, that is in power at the center. But could this fall under the realm of judicial overreach or not?
This is a welcome judgment and I don't feel that it's a judicial overreach. Whatever you have discussed, I will reply all those points in one line, 5 points, what other guests were speaking. Number one, Mr. Sinha said that this is some judicial overreach or some separation of power in the Keshwan and Bharti matter. Now, I personally feel when the governments are failing, even all the reforms are coming because of judiciary only. This CBI reform also came because of the Supreme Court judgment in the Vineet Narayan, then CVC Act came, then Lokpal Act came. So this is a welcome judgment which is good for the democracy because elections are the key to the democracy, and Article 324 talks about superintendence, direction and control of the Election Commission. So Election Commission has to be free and fair. So that is the first point. Regarding second point, that filling the gap of the Article 324(2), what learned senior advocate Sundaram Saab was saying, that this is like Vishakha and other guidelines. So I humbly disagree with him. This is not a guideline like Vishakha. This is a judgment and which is binding as per Article 141 of the Constitution. So guidelines are many times can be ignored, and guidelines are meant for general guidelines. But this is a judgment because it was required, because CBI thing came by some Lokpal Act in 2013. So ideally it should have been done by the Parliament, but after the Supreme Court judgment, it is good that as soon as Parliament comes with a law explaining all those things, so that judicial overreach aspect should be over.
But can I ask you a follow-up question? You said elections are the most important thing, and we all agree to that. The fundamental point is again that only. If you don't like, you're saying governments are failing. If people don't like a government, they vote them out. But that does not mean that we start being run by courts in a quasi manner. That's the point.
No.
What is the government's job? The government has to do. If they're failing, they'll be voted out. We cannot quite, as citizens, sit in judgment of a Supreme Court order because we don't have any powers in that domain. But when it comes to a government act, the citizens have power. Yes.
Separation of power also means that all the agencies, all the constitutional bodies should be independent. They should not be the pocket agencies of any government, whether Congress, BJP or whatsoever may be. So if selection process is being defined by the Supreme Court is not saying, and it is wrong to observe that finally the judgment will be by the Chief Justice. because ultimately they are saying that there should be a due selection process. So defining the selection process, I don't feel that this is a judicial overreach.
Okay.
But there is one problem, because normally PILs and such type of petitions goes to the Chief Justice Court, and if Chief Justice is part of the panel selection panel, and if he is the part of the selection panel, then how will they hear the matters which are arising from any order passed by the election commissioner? So normally in such type of things, there should be provision, like it has been done in the CBI matter also, that Chief Justice or the person nominated by the Chief Justice. That is the third point.
Okay.
Now the fourth point is that government has said in the Supreme Court that if some wrong selection is done, then it can be quashed by the Supreme Court. I don't agree, because once election commissioner is appointed and Chief Election Commissioner has the status of the former Supreme Court judge, so they can only be removed as per the impeachment process. By this judgment, other two election commissioner has also got the same status, but once they can remove by the due process, so I don't think that Supreme Court can, because in this matter also, one election commissioner was appointed in the lightning speed as observed by the Supreme Court.
Okay, fair enough. I'm running out of time. I'll just give Amitabh Sinha the final 30 seconds. Should the government now bring in a law, and ultimately is the executive or the legislature paying the price that they didn't formulate a policy on this? They should have done it, as the Constitution said.
Shivani, my basic, very first, problem or the objection with this judgment is, see, Supreme Court or the judiciary has the power to evaluate, the entire election process through election laws. Election petitions are the, direct jurisdiction of judiciary.
Right.
So they don't have the confidence on themselves also, and they are saying, and they are not able to, shorten the time limit for the election petitions, and they are trying to intervene and interfere in the executive. This is really a very wrong precedence is being set. So my point is that this should not be done. Transparency in judiciary is also required, and every time my fellow panelists, they are saying that CBI is not a constitutional body.
Right.
The Election Commission is a constitutional body, and they are interfering in the appointment of constitutional body.
So what should the government do now? Amitabh Sinha, what do you think the government should do now? Should they challenge this?
If the makers of constitution were not ready, clear about this, you are trying to say that the makers of the constitution were not clear about that. They have given this entire process in the hands of executive.
Exactly.
So I think the government should certainly not act as per this thing, and a law should be enacted so that this overreach should not be
I'll leave it at that. Fundamentally, there is a constitutional provision on this. If there was a gap, then it should be filled by the parliament, which is the will of the people. If the constitution needs to change or be amended or updated, there is a body, which is the parliament, that should do that. Those changes should not come from other bodies and other arms of democracy, is the point fundamentally that everyone has been left thinking about as far as this order is concerned. I thank our learned guests for joining us and appreciate your time. I'm slipping into a very short break. On the other side, we'll get you some updates from the G20 summit happening in the national capital. Also, the Prime Minister is set to speak in a bit from now at the Raisina Dialogues. Stay with us.